It is the 3rd of August, and this day in Baptist history, our reading is I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. Our passage of Scripture is Psalm 112, verse 1. Praise ye the Lord. Blessed is the man that feareth the Lord, that delighteth greatly in his commandments. America was still a young nation when Mr. and Mrs. William Yates established their home in North Carolina. The young couple settled on a large farm and were active believers in the local Baptist church, where William served as a deacon. In the course of time, the parents were blessed with 10 children, and the family was taught to revere the Bible as Christian ideals were instilled in their lives. Our present interest focuses on the second child of Mr. and Mrs. Yates, Matthew Tyson, who was born on January 8, 1819. Through his life on the farm, the lad was taught principles of frugality and a strong work ethic. Life in the rural Southland called for continual labor from morning until evening. Even during the weeks of schooling, chores had to be performed by the children. But that discipline of duty ingrained in young Matthew would serve him well through his entire lifetime. In 1836, during Matthew's teen years, Mount Pisgah Baptist Church sponsored a gospel tent meeting. The Spirit of God had been moving upon the youth's heart, and conviction gripped him. Going alone into the woods to pray, the young man cried out to the Lord for salvation, and he was soundly converted. Soon after that event, Matthew was in a group of 14 persons who were baptized in the New Hope Creek and became members of the Mount Pisgah Baptist Church. Matthew soon discovered a great desire for prayer, and he established a place of solitude in the woods where he regularly sought the presence of the Lord. The young man soon began praying, and I quote, "Lord, what wilt thou have me to do?" End of quote. The impression on Matthew's heart caused him to realize that God was calling him to preach, but he was unsettled as to whether it was really a divine call, and if so, where the Lord would desire his services. Surely the first call of God to the believer is to prepare, and thus in the fall of 1840 the young man entered Wake Forest College. Again he sought a place of solitude for meaningful private prayer, and he turned to a nearby forest. Discovering a hollow oak tree, Matthew fixed a plank floor within the tree to protect him from dampness. Secluded as he was in the presence of God, Matthew surrendered his all to the Lord. As he read the memoirs of Mrs. Ann Judson, his heart was stirred as never before toward the need of the heathen. In February of 1846, Secretary J.B. Taylor of the Foreign Mission Board visited the college. Dr. Taylor was greatly impressed with the strapping student, who was over 6 feet tall, physically well developed, and interested in missionary service. Immediately, Dr. Taylor envisioned Yates as a volunteer for the difficult task of evangelism in the Orient. Correspondence began between the two men, and Matthew revealed his sincere interest in the field of China, but he insisted that he would not go without marching orders from the Lord. Matthew had known Miss Eliza F. Mooring since the days of their childhood. They had been drawn to each other and had talked on many occasions of the challenge of the mission field. With mutual interest, the two determined to serve the Lord together, and on September 27, 1846, they were united in marriage. The union proved to be of God, as Mrs. Yates served faithfully by the side of her husband and was able to assist him greatly during periods of sickness and his travel in the interest of the work of the Lord. After its formation in 1845, the Foreign Mission Board of the Southern Convention had determined to enter China with the gospel as soon as possible. Thus it was, on August 3, 1846, Matthew and Eliza Yates were appointed for missionary labor in China. Mr. and Mrs. Yates were the first Baptist missionaries to go to a foreign field from North Carolina. The young couple sailed from Boston to Canton, China on April 26, 1847. From Canton, they sailed on to Shanghai, arriving on September 13, 1847, at what would be the center of their activities for the next 40 years. 3 other missionary couples accompanied the Yateses, but due to his linguistic skills and preaching ability, Matthew Yates is looked upon as the founder of the work. Sickness and death soon took a heavy toll, and by 1851, of the 8 who had begun that ministry, only the Yateses were left in Shanghai. Yates began an intensive work in the Chinese language and was able to preach in that language at the end of 1 year. However, his optic nerve was affected, and under the order of his physician, he had to stop all studying and reading for months. In order to continue his proficiency in the language, Yates mingled with the throngs of people and perfected his pronunciation of the Chinese language. In 1843, 3 Chinese converts were baptized before an amazing throng. Political rebellion was being agitated at that time in China, and in 1853 the Taiping Rebellion erupted with fury. Though danger lurked and public meetings had to be suspended, the Yateses refused to leave the mission property until the government gave assurance of reparations in the event of damage to the facilities. The rebellion was finally quelled and the work was resumed in 1854. By 1856, there were 4 preaching stations and 18 regular meetings were held each week. After 10 years of labor, the strength of the couple had been depleted and a furlough was necessary. As physical vigor returned, the dear missionary couple shared their burden with American congregations. With their hearts still in China, the Yateses returned to the field in the spring of 1860. The following year, the American Civil War broke out, and the missionaries soon found themselves with dwindling funds. But the ingenuity of a farmer and the insight of a financier led Mr. Yates to make investments in China that in time made him financially independent. The investments that he made during those trying years allowed him in later life to become a generous benefactor of Christian enterprises in his homeland as well as in China. He trained the national church in self-support and continually sought out promising young men whom he could train for the work of the ministry. Tragically, health problems that began in 1880 plagued the man of God for the rest of his life. He was forced to travel extensively to seek relief from changes of climate, but always his first thought was for the ministry among the Chinese. His correspondence with the Mission Board reveals constant requests for additional laborers for the field. Finally, in 1886, 2 additional couples joined the Yateses to assist in the tremendous labors of reaching China's millions. Help had arrived just in time, for on June 30th, 1887, Mr. Yates experienced a stroke that led to partial paralysis. Still, he would not quit. He loved to preach, but now preaching drained him of all his remaining energy, but still he persisted. It was apparent to his fellow workers that his very life potency was ebbing away, yet he continued to make plans for the future. Matthew Yates became bedridden, and on the morning of March 17, 1888, the hero of the faith seemed to be free from all pain. As family and friends watched by his bedside, all was peaceful. As the day wore on, he lay quietly, scarcely breathing. Then, as the eventide came, he seemed to breathe terrestrial air, but opening spiritual eyes in glory, he breathed his first breath of celestial air. The funeral was held on March 19, 1888. Several of the Chinese brethren expressed obvious delight in the display of love toward the man of God. They said, "Oh, how they loved him." But one Chinese believer summarized it well when he responded, "Oh yes, but how he loved us." One of the last prayers that Matthew Yates prayed was, and I quote, "Oh, for a revival among pastors and churches on the subject of foreign missions to the heathen." End of quote. Inasmuch as no prayer is ever lost, let us trust the Lord to grant this petition even now throughout our land. To God be the glory.